Welcome to the Grow Your Practice podcast. Hi, I'm your host, Chad Madden, owner of Madden Physical Therapy and Breakthrough. Join me each week as we dive into the best practices, systems, principles, tips, and tricks to help you grow your private practice. Hey, everybody. Today, I'm here with Ben Fung. Many of you know Ben from UpDoc Media. He's been in the marketplace for quite a while in private practice PT. Welcome to the podcast here, Ben.
Thanks for having me, Chad. This has been a little bit of a time coming. We keep doing this like revolution around each other at various conferences and in like the interwebs, and so it's finally happening.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think we might have briefly met. I'm gonna guess like 2014, 2015.
Mm-hmm. Yep, around that time for sure.
Yeah, it's been a while. Great. So let's start with your story. You know, how you got into physical therapy. I know you had a professional background, or at least had explored other areas of education and degrees as well. Can you talk about how you got into physical therapy and then also into UpDoc Media and exactly what that is?
Sure. I mean, I have a very atypical story when it comes to getting into PT. You know, I think a lot of part of it is typical. You know, I think a lot of us got into the profession because we were once patients in physical therapy. Typically, we were athletes or something of that nature. For me, it's a little bit of both. So I suffered a really impressive, tragic early season snowboarding accident. It was like the first snow in Southern California. And I did as the kids say, I went to full send or whatever it was. And I annihilated myself on some, Apache moguls I was trying to jump on, ended up with a huge back contusion, lost a bit of what they at the time described as disc height, which we probably categorize differently now. And I had a eversion grade 2 ankle sprain, which was amazing. So that sent me down the PT route for a second time in my life, and that put PT on the radar. But prior to that, I wasn't your typical biology or biochem or physiology or kinesiology major. I was actually an engineer. So I started undergrad in UCSD in bioengineering. They had a pre-med track back then for folks that wanted to maybe get into healthcare or biomedical tech on the consumer side. So I opted for that. They don't even offer that anymore because that track was apparently too difficult and too disjointed. My GPA definitely reflected that. And so, working from that time period, I actually realized really quickly I didn't like engineering. I didn't like research. So like many kids when you're really young and kind of not just fully directed, maybe not mature enough in from a career pathing standpoint, went soul searching, found myself bartending, being very good at it because it's a people thing. You know, it's a little bit of a show. It's a people thing. But eventually one of my mentors said, hey, look, you have an engineering degree. You can't just bartend for the rest of your life and then surf when you're off. So they encouraged me to volunteer at a medical campus that had a PT clinic. It was like their flagship PT clinic. Found it very similar to bartending, you just walk people here and there. You talk to them. It was basically like aid work or tech work for the most part without the modalities. And then the manager there eventually offered me a job. The pay was very similar to bartending and I didn't have to work nights. So, that was a win. After that, a lot of therapists are like, look, you're smart, you're good at this, like you're natural to this. I was surfing and studying martial arts at the time for my hobbies. There's a lot of crossover in terms of at least orthopedics and, martial arts, like end range stuff, like in jujitsu and whatnot. You're trying to find different joint ranges and stretch them a little bit to get a tap. And so they're like, look, like you would love this, instead of cranking people to tap out, you crank people to make them feel better, for lack of better terms. That's how they sold it. And so I did my prereqs and, big shout out and thanks to the admissions board at Azusa Pacific University, but they took a gamble on me. I was the second lowest GPA in my class, entered with probation, graduated with honors. And so they took a bet on me that, hey, look, this guy looks like he's finally getting his act together. Let's give him a shot. He's a different character than the typical applicants. And that's kind of how I got into PT.
Nice. So a couple questions on that.
Yeah.
Was there, as you were going through that journey, and it sounded like you were snowboarding and surfing quite a bit, was there a point where you were like, oh, this is what I want to do the rest of my life outside of or in addition to the conversation with the mentor, or was that the turning point for you?
That was the turning point. I mean, I think I don't want to be a wet towel to the like this is my calling conversation that's very common in physical therapy, but let's just be honest. It wasn't. It was one of those things of I didn't really know where I was going in life. Like if we're just being honest, I was a kid that was just a little bit immature for that time period of life. I needed direction, I needed structure, I needed some wisdom in my life. And so it was really through mentorship that they're like, hey, look, you got to do something with your life because that time that commodity is limited. Um, the more I learned about physical therapy, though, the more I was like, I love this stuff, and it became one of those things of, the ideal is to do stuff that you love and get paid for it. I found that physical therapy was something I liked to begin with, and then the more I found out about it, and the more I rotated as a student, the more I worked in industry, the more I thought that this was just an incredible field. And it's I'm lucky in that sense where there are some students out there that they get pretty far and they even get to graduate and they go, oh wow, I have some regrets about that. Unfortunately, I don't. I think that the more I found myself deep into the profession, the more I was like, you know what, this is very much worth investing in.
Nice. So you graduated. What year did you graduate from PT school? Just for,
Oh nine.
okay, great. So you came out. You worked as a clinician, I assume.
Yes.
And then how did the vision, the mission for UpDoc Media, how did that start?
Yeah, that's great. So that path is also very atypical. Graduated '09, and then shortly after I got an acute care job. Actually, like many students, I came into PT school, and the idea once I got kind of through the usual clinical skills one and anatomy classes, you get to breathe and kind of go, okay, where do I want this to go? And I thought to myself, I wanted to work 5 years and open up a private practice. Um, I couldn't find any outpatient or sports med orthopedic type jobs. So I went into acute care because that was actually my favorite rotation in school. Found that I loved it and loved it even more. The dynamic environment, it's very high paced, interdisciplinary team. You got to put a lot more of your differential diagnosis hat on. So I really enjoyed that. Worked there a couple of years, found some structural glass ceilings for lack of better terms. And so the CEO of the hospital, now retired at the time, I kind of asked him for help, and so he invited me to mentor me a little bit. And he basically said, "Look, at least in this environment, in like the high level health system, corporate health environment, a PT, no matter how well degreed or credentialed, is still just a PT. If you want a voice at the decision making table, you're going to need something else. You're going to need like an MBA or MHA or a MPH or a PhD or something that has something, CPA, even like something that's deeper into the business of operating within healthcare, not just having good clinical credentials." So I took his advice, started doing an online executive hybrid MBA from University of Michigan, and then took a lateral, well, like a transfer promotion to another company to do an area rehab project. Trying to float that thing from years of not being profitable into being profitable, which I was successful with. But then same kind of thing happened, which is, life and work didn't match very well. And so I suffered very early burnout in terms of career. Like this is only a couple years in. I tried home health, I tried wellness, I tried a bunch of different things. And back then, Twitter, a couple of the co-founders of UpDoc reached out to me because I started a blog based on my insights from the MBA curriculum and how it reflected on the physical therapy industry. And so they said, "Hey, look, you want to merge our voices and maybe form a media company?" And that's really the only idea we had at the time. And I was like, "Well, what is that?" I was like, "I don't know. We'll just blog and podcast and throw out YouTube videos and see what happens." Like that was the idea, and I mean that worked back in 2014, 15, and it was a brand new environment. And I was like, sure, like what do I have to lose? Like I showed myself that I can do certain things in the corporate environment, but didn't like it. And so this became the obvious next step after some invitation, a little heartstring tugging. And I was like, all right, count me in. We'll see where this goes. And truth be told, that's really the formation of UpDoc. And then it really evolved very quickly because I think we were trying to like shadow what Gary Vaynerchuk was doing at the time, and even a little bit of Neil Patel. And very quickly, it was shown that our industry, at least physical therapy and rehab therapy at large, wasn't ready for that. So we had to translate this kind of digital media and marketing environment into something that was a little bit more value driven, a little less sales driven, a little bit more relationship driven, and very much content driven in terms of like creating industry insights and trends analysis that maybe wasn't as accessible as they are now, especially back in the 20 teens.
Yeah. So you mentioned something that our industry wasn't really ready for, the Gary Vaynerchuk style. Can you do a deeper dive onto that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is really fun, and you know, if there's any either cross shared clients or past clients that are listening to this, they're gonna laugh at it. We decided to go hard, you know, and you know, we built a brand and a website that was very, for lack of better terms, like very click funnels at the time. So we're like mid 20 teens, like click funnel based, and very hard sell, very much like, you know, inbound, outbound. And so really what it was that, you know, we positioned UpDoc as a voice in the community that had good insights and could also bring those insights to your practice and leverage our media techniques and marketing techniques to your brand. The problem that we came up across was that, you know, we wanted to do this initially as an industry agnostic brand label, you know, like not just PT, but we could do, I mean, we had attorneys as clients, we had construction companies, we had educational publishers as clients at the time. But you know, our roots is in PT, and we felt a heart for that because at the time, many private practices didn't have the competencies of doing that, and they were getting they were getting steamrolled by companies that had larger marketing budgets, that had like a central marketing team that could do these things for them. And our mistake was we had made the wrong assumption that if we put ourselves out like, you know, like Gary Vaynerchuk, like all attitude, very much, you know, like certain landing pages that are built a certain way that are kind of flashy and very modern at the time, that yeah, they'll see, and of course, like they'll see us and, you know, we're credible and blah blah blah, and they would buy in, and that did not work at all. You know, and it turns out, and I still think it's the case in physical therapy, we're kind of we're kind of like a retro hip culture, you know, as physical therapists, and we very much it's in our DNA as clinicians. We value the relationship, and so that's where we had to make a very strong pivot of like, okay, we can't just rely on this digital archetype pathway. We still need to go boots on the ground, for lack of better terms, in our own environment. And establish relationships, establish connections on a very human level. It's not just about the results; it's about trusting the person that'll deliver it.
What was the main thing? How are you serving the private practice industry back in the mid 20 teens, and how has that evolved to what you're doing today?
Yeah, so back in the mid 20 teens, we kind of considered ourselves a full stack digital marketing company or digital media company. So, you know, we didn't hyper specialize in any one environment. We did websites, we did SEO, we did, you know, online review marketing, we did branding and brand analysis consulting. We ran social media campaigns, we did high level productions where we would either fly people out or we'd be flown out. We bring all our video gear and like, you know, produce these really cool like portfolios, for lack of better terms, where they could use that on their social media airwaves for like the next like 18 months. So that was kind of what we did. And we had various tiers of servicing that. And that was probably the mid 20 teens through 2019-ish or so, was very much in that full stack digital marketing space. You know, we didn't really have any kind of templates. We position ourselves as, hey, imagine us as like a fractional like external vendor with internal interests. And you know, because we know you, you know, we're not just some media company out there, like we are one of you. And that worked really well for brands and for practices and for entities that wanted to work with an agency or a vendor like that. As it evolved, especially through you know, 2020 2021, that overnight honestly went away. You know, all of a sudden everyone needed to know for a fact, hey, how do I run my own website, or how do I run my own social media airwaves? How do I deal with email marketing? You know, can I integrate it with an EMR? Can I integrate that with like a billing cycle and a, you know, like a revenue management system? Like all of that came overnight in 2020 and 2021. So we pivoted pretty hard into, for lack of better terms, talent management and analysis and consulting in that venue. And so we stepped away. I mean, we kept a lot of legacy clients that wanted to stay with us, but we stopped taking new clients in the media and marketing sphere and really focused on like executive business development and consulting in that venue of where do you need to be strategically both in your marketplace and operations, but also how do you meaningfully connect with your people that are in your workforce, because that became a huge problem. I'm sure everyone listening will remember how there was the great everythings back in 2021 and 2022, right? The great resignation, right? The great regret, the great recovery, the great everything. And so we rode that wave for a while, to basically take our industry insights and turn them into, instead of being macro, we would micro focus on companies that were like, hey, we need you to analyze us. Like, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Where are the blind spots because we're too close?
Great. Let's stay on the job market for a little while,
Sure.
because that has, and I'm just coming off of a conference with private practice owners. I asked the question, who's hiring, now or within the next 6 months? Every hand goes up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about some of the trends that you've seen? And you mentioned all the greats that we went through in 21 and 22. And yeah, it was a wild scene just as an employer to go through um, that time and reflect back on that. But can you talk about what's changed in the last 2 or 3 years and how private practice owners should be thinking about that, setting them up for success and growing their own team?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the couple of top of mind biggest changes and trends in terms of like hiring, talent management, that kind of stuff, really comes off the heels of digital healthcare. There's a lot of, especially in our world, there's, and I consider stuff like, Hinge, Sword, Luna, and a bunch of the dispatch type, they call it like the Ubers of healthcare. I consider them as part of that ecosphere because what they've allowed themselves to do is they created an architecture where they can hire clinicians, which means you can't, right, as a private practitioner. They've hired the talent out there in an area that's cost effective for them and time efficient for the clinician labor force, for lack of better terms. And so now you have to compete with that, not just very, very high paying home health jobs or very, very high paying, 13 to 16 week travel contract jobs. And what this crop, for lack of better terms, or this generation of the workforce at large really values is flexibility, pretty much above anything else. They will say yes to pay. They will say no to certain like cultural problems that they see in the workplace, which you have like 5 minutes to clear up with them on interview. But the biggest thing is that there are that many more competitive forces, and so you really need to hone in what your offer is as an employer and how that matches to, it's almost like marketing for your ideal patient. Like, what's your ideal workforce avatars, or what are your ideal workforce avatars, and how do you market to them, and how do you create a product in the form of employment that fits those particular avatar desires? And I would say off the top, having like flexibility for young new mothers is a big deal. To be able to benefit them out, that's a big deal. And so you need to be able to create an employment as a product to fit that particular consumer, for lack of better terms. There are so many new grads and, like, maybe like 5 to 10 year experience level clinicians that are branching out to do their own little like mobile micro practices. How can you retain that person or retain several of those kind of people to create a work team so that it kind of fits what we might have thought about as like one FTE 10 years ago, right? And so putting our employer hats on in the same frame that a marketing specialist might, in terms of what those avatars want, and then creating that kind of job environment within our own confines, which is a huge challenge, right? Because for us, we need clinicians in office seeing patients to make any kind of revenue. In a classical sense. So, those trends are really big. Location is another huge challenge that we've seen. I was talking with a clinical group out in the Southwest, like New Mexico and Arizona, and I think like 30% of their workforce is actual W-2s, and 70% of them are all travels, right? And so that model is starting to emerge for locations that people kind of just don't want to be in anymore. And for the locations that people do want to be in, that is like hyper saturated, right? So we're talking like Colorado, for crying out loud, is like a very challenging area for people to compete for human resources. And it's a situation where you need to start recruiting 5, 6 years ahead of your needs, and recognize also that there's a new turnover table, right? Like there's a survey data point that we sent out from UpDoc about, where the various tiers of turnover are, because that's going to be natural, right? Like you have family or people retire, or there's a life change in the midlife, and those people that may not want to actually leave your practice will have to because of life. So how do you trend that in your own practice and go, oh, okay, clinician D is 5 years with us. They're very likely going to leave in the next 2 years. So what do I need to do today to fill that seat? Because that nurture cycle of getting a student to new grad and kind of getting their emotional commitment to joining your practice, that needs to be that much earlier. Where we once were accustomed of, oh, it's July. There's a bunch of new grads. We're absolutely going to have no problem hiring, which is no longer the case.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. That especially with the last point there. To clean up, you mentioned something like if there's a cultural discrepancy or like a cultural cue that we can clean that up within 5 minutes in the interview.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
So, in one of the corporate quality index surveys for UpDoc, I think this might have been like a 22 or 23 result. We always ask different questions because we like to do a sentiment analysis. That much better now with AI. You just have to sanity check it as a human to make sure that AI isn't being weird. But that said, we asked for what are like immediate turnoffs, either in a job description or in the interview, that make somebody basically just check out and they're no longer interested. They may walk out of the interview, they may hang up on you over the phone, those kind of things, like complete dead stops. And there were a couple of things that showed up. And it's interesting because I would say 15 years ago, um, this would actually be a pro, right? Like, so phrases like, hey, welcome to this practice. We're like a family here. Like, awesome. You're going to take care of me, right? That's like 15 years ago. Now that's like, oh, they're going to overwork me. That became, the change in sentiment, leaning. And different things like that. Like we're looking for hustlers. We're looking for go-getters. We're looking for rock stars. We're looking for anything that might have, that gives this vibe that we may want to ask you to work harder than the job description initially entailed. That is no longer considered a pro. Whereas I would say, 10, 15 years ago, that signaled like an opportunity ramp. Like 10, 15 years ago, that was like, oh, that means I can come in here and pay my dues. And like a year, 2, 3 in, I'll be clinic director. Now that's seen as, oh, they're going to take every opportunity to overwork me. They're not going to give me a proper onboarding and training experience. They're going to just set and forget me. They're going to just make me bill out units. And it's very interesting how that has changed. And so if you find that that has come through, it needs to be immediately addressed. Like again, you have about a 5-minute window when you see that person's countenance change to identify that, and almost derail your own conversation as a hiring manager in the interview, because now the interview has become more like a sales pitch, right? Like as a hiring manager, you're interviewing to pitch that person to say yes to the job. And so you need to change that immediately and go, hey, at this moment, I just want to stop everything, say, just check in. Do you have any kind of questions or concerns? Are there things that we can address right now? Should you say yes to the job that would really make your life better and your employment experience better should you decide to join our team, right? And change the tone of that environment so that they don't feel like they're being talked at, but they're being talked with.
Yeah. The, uh, can I go even deeper into that?
Please, yeah.
Because
There's so much here. I mean, I
yeah.
feel like this could be an entire podcast series on its own.
Well, I think it's and again, from talking with a lot of owners, it's not only something that I've seen in my own practice and interviewing, but there's a very critical point that if we don't address this, we can get lost. And again, reflected from all the owners that I was with last week, the point came up around what most owners are saying is like, oh, they just want work-life balance, and we don't know what that. And I'm not exactly sure how to define that.
Yeah.
But I think it really gets into what you're talking about now, Ben. And for me, if so, like last year was a really rough year. I think we only had 3 DPT interviews in the classic July. And
Right. Like, so it's supposed to be like 15.
yeah,
Like, what happened?
when I circled back with the programs, that we have relationships with, the program directors said, "Hey, this is the pandemic class. Like this was the enrollment for the professional program was in like 2020, 2021. Our numbers were low. We had less numbers coming out. We had to open up our requirements a little bit. And yeah, so just lower in quantity and rougher in quality is what they had said. I'm probably butchering it.
That's a very fair statement. I don't think it's not a shade thrown at the
Yeah.
talent crop. It was a product of the environment.
Yeah, exactly. So this year we had this influx where we had, I think I ended up with 10 interviews that I did this year, and we made a significant amount of hires. I think it was five or six. But oftentimes, and I look for this exact point that you're talking about, is how are they thinking about time, money, resources, their future? And we'll get to this point, and frequently what they'll say is something along the lines of, here are my expectations in terms of pay or bonus or benefits or whatever it is. I want to hear that. And so we asked them that question, if you could wave a magic wand, what would your ideal position look like?
Mhm.
Pretend like you never met me or anything like that, just a blank slate. What does that look like? And they'll share that. And then frequently what we'll go into is first a touch on how they became a PT. Like why did they choose that? Sometime it's the calling, like you mentioned, or
Mhm.
other times there's another scenic route that they took into becoming a therapist and how they made that decision. But we want to see like how they're making life decisions. We'll then get into a little bit of financial literacy, very, very light though. And it's like, here's the game we're playing. We want to protect that passion that you have for helping other people as much as possible. But we can't ignore business math.
Mhm.
Here's what we'll share everything. We'll share revenue, costs, bottom line. I will share absolutely everything with you. You need to know what that looks like. And then we start talking about, are you going to be taking Medicare patients? Likely, yes. In the last 17 years, we've had two increases and 11 decreases. And, just absolutely shocked. So we get into that, and then we'll address a lot of the flexibility issues that you're talking about, like evening hours, easy to change payer mix. You're going to have a better payer mix at night, but, some people don't want to stay until 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night. You don't want to work weekends, whatever, we're going to figure out how to work this together. So that's kind of like what I've fallen into innately just with reps. When you're working with another practice, is there something else? Like, I want you to poke holes in what I'm doing. It's really what I'm
Oh.
asking you to do. Yeah.
I mean, poking holes on that is honestly a little challenging because I feel like you're doing it right. I feel like what a lot of practices are not doing is they're not giving visibility into the business math, like you say. I feel that some of the most, let me double back. It's the old marketing adage from like the early, actually I would say it's like the mid 2000s. Right, it's easier to keep a customer than to make a new one, right? And similarly, it's easier to keep an employee than to get a new one. And I think that's always been the case. We just didn't realize what the mass exodus and mayhem would be back in 2021 and 2022.
Yeah.
When the dust finally settled and people said, look, like either ain't nobody got time for it, I'm not being paid enough for this nonsense, or, all that came through and they're like, you know what, I'll take on credit card debt because I cannot stand working for you. Right. Like that's basically what the message was. So what you're doing is perfect because I think, we used to call it transparency. I feel like the verbiage has changed into visibility, right? Is to give high levels of visibility to, line staff and mass, right? And appropriately, like not, you can't go into certain parts of that business finance just because some of that stuff is confidential, but like you go over, hey, what's that revenue per patient mix, or what's the average revenue per minute versus cost per minute of this particular facility, and how do you contribute to that or how do you take away from that if you're not as productive? Like some of that stuff gets really interesting because innately, I think that people that go into, I mean, any rehab therapy, PTOT, speech, we're typically pretty altruistic in nature. We're also very much perfectionists. We don't like being told that we did something wrong because we have already given it 110% effort to make it be right. And the other thing that we really don't like is we don't like trickle down blame, for lack of better terms, where there might be something on my metric, but I can't, like, it went through somebody else's plate or several other people's plates before it came to mine, but somehow I'm being held accountable for that moment. Right. And so, I really can't poke a hole in what you're doing just because I feel like you're doing that correctly. What I would, say instead is, uh, how can we optimize that method, right? And like in terms of answering your question directly about what am I seeing in terms of like consulting with the practice owners that I have been, really is less so about doing less negative. It's more so about doing more positive because some of the negatives are just reality checks that we can't change. Like students are coming out with X amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. Like we can't change that in the marketplace, at least not right now. What we can do is we can partner with various academic institutions and try to get some of that business math in their curriculum earlier. Right. And like I've started to shift over into adjunct professorship, and I'm very big on that. I was like, look, if I knew some of these things I didn't know coming out as a new grad, I would certainly have been a lot less angsty about it, and like I needed to know it, but nobody was there to treat it, to teach it. They just said, okay, create this clinic design, and it came at it from a very commercial standpoint and not from like a very deep, macro plus microeconomics and what does the industry, competitive forces look like, like what you said, like how many Medicare increases have we had versus decreases? What happened, when we started to take contracts from like unnamed commercial payers that aren't very friendly, right? So it's a family show. Maybe
Yeah.
not. So I think that's part of it. And I think that, really optimizing what you do, because it's also there's a different strength and specialty depending on what you have. Like a private practice in rural Oklahoma will offer a different value mix than say a practice chain like where I am in San Diego, where practice owners here can say, hey, look, it's San Diego, and it's always between 70 and 75. You can go to the mountains in an hour drive to see snow, and in 20 minutes you'll be at the beach and you can surf. And there is a multicultural center here, right? There's diversity, there's this, there's that, but you have to pay the sunshine tax. But I will pay you as much as possible to stick around in this, and we can create flexibility that way. So you can go surf in the morning, or you can take your kid to the beach in the afternoon, whatever, right? That's a different value proposition than, hey, you're in rural Oklahoma, and we're not going to treat you like new school family where we're going to like overwork you. We're going to treat you like an old school family where, hey, if somebody gets sick, we're going to find a way to take care of you. We're going to find a way to cover your shifts. If weather destroys your home, like we're going to cancel some morning patients, and I'm going to come over there and help you fix up, whatever got broken. It's a different environment and a different culture altogether. Not to mention, I may not be able to pay you in dollars this quarter because we didn't make it, and you've seen that we've done this in our quarterly meeting. But I'm gonna give you a quarter beef, because that's what I have. And so it's a different environment, it's a different expectation, and it has more to do with like making higher points of good versus lowering some of the negatives. Now, some negatives are deal breakers. I have to say that right off. Where we have seen that if you can't get rid of certain things like micromanagement, you can't get rid of certain things like a secretly toxic coworker that might have been there for like 12 years and somehow they're still there in that same position causing the same exact problems, but nobody's willing to perform as that person out. You're not going to win. Some of those you have to get rid of. Other stuff that the facts of life, for lack of better terms, like, hey, guess what? Electricity is super expensive now. Like we got to keep the lights on. And here's the bill. What are your thoughts, to help mitigate this, or help pay for it, or help create a situation where we can give you your quarterly bonus? I think those are the kind of conversations. And so it's less about poking holes and more about creating better water flow despite some of the drainage. I think that's the environment and the reality that we're playing in right now.
Smart. Appreciate the feedback.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah. I love how we have quite a few different vantage points or that you've been exposed to. The one in academia, I think is fascinating. So you talked about building a pipeline. The mental note that I took is we've gone out to 3 years, and I very rarely hear another practice owner saying, hey, 3 years. You just said 5 to 6. So for a practice owner who's looking to build out for hiring now in 2030, with an anticipation of need, maybe they're adding another clinic, maybe maybe they anticipate some sort of turnover. I've seen data that suggests that 20 something DPTs are the average tenure is like 1.1 years.
Yep.
Uh,
9 to 15 months is what I've seen in in like the confidence interval.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So knowing that, if I want to build out that 5-year pipeline, where do I start? You don't have to give a super detailed plan, but for most of us, we're like, well, I'll just write a better Indeed ad, right? And that's not going to cut it.
No,
So
no, no. I mean, if you really want to play the long game, I would start with pre-PT students, for lack of better terms. Um, I'll give you a local example. So I table regularly for a conference here in San Diego called the UCSD Meds Conference. Now it's not directly there. It stands for, I think, the Medical Education Diversity Students Conference. So it's like a weekend conference, and they don't just cover like physician, nurse, pharmacist. They cover PA, NP, public health workers, PTs, OTs, speech. They cover the whole gamut. And so I speak there almost every single year. And there's an entire crop of undergraduates that are essentially pre-PT without being pre-PT, because that track may not be and may not exist. I would honestly start there. And just by being present there and telling, hey, look, if you want to really see it, come to my clinic. We'll get you onboarded as like a volunteer intern. It'll look great on your resume. We'll teach you everything you need to know to even get into school at the local level or at the state or wherever. Like we'll mentor you. Like we're gonna offer all these things. Just why don't you just come on by? Let's establish that relationship. That's where I would start. And then you track them. You keep in contact with them. You send them either quarterly or biannual or annual emails or text messages, like from your actual phone. Like this is a very high human touch situation. It's not, here's my MailChimp list or Infusionsoft list of 35 different interns I got from UCSD, right? This is like from your own phone. Um, Start there, right? Like Snapchat them if you have to. Just be appropriate.
yeah, yeah.
you know, that's where I would start. From the PT school standpoint, this requires a lot more nurturing because the cogs of academia move that much slower, and a lot of that has to do with the rules and regulations they have to follow. I'm still learning so much about that, and you got to start now to try to crack that egg and get maybe one of your clinicians to become an adjunct for one of their business admin classes or a guest lecturer. Like you have you yourself as a practice owner apply to be part of their lecture pool, like whatever the case might be. That's where you need to start because that's where the upstream talent begins, right? And so if we try to catch them by the time they reach the flats of the pool of what's on my screen, like before when you go, okay, they graduated June, July, like let's just scoop them up there. It's way too late. They've scattered. So I hope that answered the question.
No, I think you nailed it. And it's very, I think that's a super accurate reflection of what we've seen in the marketplace, where we're constantly pushing that. I call it pushing the pay line, like earlier and earlier. It's probably the higher line earlier and earlier. But yeah, exactly right. 20 years ago, I threw something on a PT website, the APTA or PPTA, and we would be able to hire somebody.
Hmm.
What do we have back then? Monster.com and
Yep.
Advanced Magazine is pretty
Yep.
much the pathways. And to rely on that same thing is not going to work today. I have two partners that started with us as aides, as undergrads.
Yeah.
So and they've gone the whole way through. So they were aides, got back into DPT school, went and got their DPT, started with us as entry level, became an established physical therapist with a team. They were a team leader, then clinical director, then partner. And yeah, I mean, they've been with us for 18 years.
And I think what you're describing is, especially in outpatient orthopedics, that it's like a retro future, right? It reminds me of like like the medical practices and partnerships of the 80s,
Yeah.
where you get that like associate into, and all the way up the chain and make partner. I really do think that's what we're looking at in terms of the future of private practice. And it's going to come in a spectrum, right? It's going to be a continuum of like, look, I'm just here to get my paycheck and see my patients, to no, I really believe in this place and this is the life I want. So identifying what those particular desire points is huge. I think that's, you're taking the absolute optimal step on that front, is getting them as early as AIDS and go like, hey, do you like this? Because you can be here. It will
Yep.
take time, but I will train you and back you up, and make sure that you reach these goals.
Yeah. Um, Good one that I pulled out here that I want to make sure I have time to ask you. So you've said something, this was a quote that you had, and I'm sorry if you don't know exactly where this is from because I don't either, but you've said that, solve your personnel problems, which is what we're talking about now.
Mm-hmm.
Patients are ready and waiting. So for the practice owner who is thinking, I have a new patient problem, and they don't, recognize the drop-offs that they have or any other problems that they might have in the business, and they think that it's all about new patients. Can you walk us through your thinking and the prioritization of personnel over marketing?
Yeah, yeah. And this is humbling, especially as someone, I have an MBA in marketing. So this is very humbling for me to say, this is not the important step. Like the marketing is not the important step. Um, I think we all academically appreciate, acknowledge, understand, and value the sentiment that a happy clinician or a happy clinician team or a well cared for clinician team will produce a better patient experience product. I think we all agree on that. I think where we disagree, or maybe that we're a little blind to, or perhaps we just don't prioritize, is making sure that that clinician workforce body is well cared for. And that includes you as the practice owner, especially if you're hauling 15, 18-hour days, you're seeing patients for 10, 12 hours a day, and then you're doing admin and other, work and home and other stuff like that all adds up and delays. There's a certain level of fatigue that builds up in the human condition, for lack of better terms, that absolutely reflects in treatment, in patient interactions. It bleeds over to your receptionist, which I think everyone has really understood is a very, very important touch point. And so when we don't care for that, right? We don't nurture that, make sure that our people are replenished. What ends up happening is we have a bunch of burnt out, tired, fatigued, not exactly wants to be there, maybe even in fear of going back to work on Monday, clinicians taking care of patients that are betting big on their own health and placing that in your hands. Um, I found that when you have that level of fatigue, uh, it's not that the clinical outcomes are worse per se. Like I don't have data to say that. But I think that the overall experience is worse. And I do have data to support that. And so that really has a down trickle effect, because you might have, say, 80% of patients that are always going to come back to you because that's the first place they went. Fine. But now it's 60% or 50% or 40%. They're no longer telling, their friends and family about how they had a total knee replacement. They went to your place and they were happy there, right? They went to your place. It felt like a dungeon. They cranked on your knee. They made you do squats. They made you do terminal knee extensions, right? They may have pampered you with some ice or some soft tissue, but nobody was smiling, and everybody was like down and dungy, and there's no energy in the gym or in the the knee room or whatever setup you might have. Um, the clinic owner always moved around like they were stressed out and their hair was on fire, and like all that kind of stuff really bleeds through. And I think that we don't think about that at a priority enough, because we're so stressed out about how am I going to pay the bills tomorrow, right? And I think it's one of those things of it's like, so I'm going to detract it and come right back, I promise. Um, I've been learning a lot about agriculture recently. It's a whole side project, right? And it's like, I can fertilize the crap out of my soil now. That's great. I'm going to get one or two really good crops. That's awesome. And after that, I have destroyed my soil. I no longer have soil, I have dirt, right? And it's very similar to that, where if I amend the soil, if I give that soil like the proper treatment and the proper mixture of grasses and get the right kind of animals on top of it, and rotate that kind of grazing and whatever, like in 3, 4, 5 years, I'm going to have a completely different ecosystem. But I need to pay for that now versus just throw a bunch of like scattered nonsense on top. Great. I'm going to get one big crop of potatoes. And then after that, nothing. And I think that's where we're caught is it's very, very difficult on a human psyche level to say, all right, I need to invest in this and I may not get potatoes this season. Like I might starve a little this season. It may hurt a little this season and forget to go and think about that long term. So that's really where I've seen that play out.
That's great. I'm glad I asked the question. Just to follow up on a few things there. So um, I just blanked on the guy's name, Joel, that I follow all the time, that does the sustainable farming. Oh, I just blanked on it.
Okay.
I'll get it for you though. We'll
Okay.
put it in the show notes. But
Okay.
yeah. Like I dove deep down square foot gardening, no-till, crop rotation, everything else that you're talking about. So love that. Kelly Brown with Prediction Health did a nice piece on this where they do have the data. I think Prediction Health is now with Prompt, but they've talked about where they can see burnout and how it affects clinical outcomes, how it affects billing.
Oh yeah.
It's yeah, rough conversation for most private practice owners to dive into and
Yeah.
confront that, but that's a very real issue. The other thing that I'll share with you is a pretty cool side project we have with one of our clinicians who oversees all of our clinical education for our 42 or 43 clinicians that we have now. But we looked at a bell curve of performance and we looked at two key variables. One is graduation rate, so the opposite of drop off or patients going missing in
Hmm.
action. And exactly like, the reasoning behind it is a patient who is engaged and achieving their goals, they're going to complete their plan of care. That's the person that comes back to us in the future and
Hmm.
refers other people to us, exactly as you've said. The other thing that we look at is just the business math. And, we've looked at visits in the past or build units or like all these other metrics and sub metrics. But what we settled on was we have a weekly production goal that combines both. So we don't very much discern whether somebody is high visits and low billing or vice versa. It's just basically the clinicians keeping their schedule full. What we noticed is that people that are clinicians that frequently graduate near 100% or at 100% graduation rate. We just had somebody do it here for an entire quarter. And then also keep their schedule full. They tend to go through very similar behavior patterns as treating clinicians. So we're trying to isolate this out, and I'll share two quick wins with you, and you
Yeah.
feel free to use this. The first one is we found a clinician who she discerns whether somebody is right or left brained, and if they are numbers oriented, the patient is number oriented, then she talks about their progress relative to numbers.
Hmm.
And if they are functional and emotional oriented, then she talks about like what it will mean for them to sit on the floor and play,
Yeah.
matchbox cars with their grandson.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, that is really good.
Yeah.
And no wonder you're consistent, no wonder patients love working with you. That was one big one. The other one is came from a Daniel Kahneman article that our group started using. I wasn't even aware of this, but it's basically how to always end on a positive note
Hmm.
at the clinician. I never really put that together. Some of our clinicians, save the hardest thing till the end. I get that. And our best clinicians say, no, we're going to do the hardest thing in the beginning and always end on a win before that person leaves for the day. So yeah, just insight, just to back up everything that you're saying. I completely agree with you. I appreciate the clarification as well. Um, one more thing that I want to ask you before we hop
Yeah.
off here, corporate quality index.
Yes.
What is that? What's the vision for it? I know you mentioned that in the same sentence as AI a few minutes ago. Can you talk about what that is and how practice owners can benefit from that?
Sure, sure. So the corporate quality index is something that we came up with at UpDoc. We identified, I think originally it was 6 or 7 key indicators as a composite, and I think it expanded to 10. I think we eventually reduced it back to 8, just because some of them were overlapping. And essentially, it's like a net promoter score matrix of, how do you feel like you're getting paid? Do you recommend this as a practice as an employer, 0 to 10, that kind of stuff? To, do you feel like your employer is a socially responsible employer? To, how aligned are you with the workplace culture, all that kind of stuff. So there's a list of these different questions, very similar to like a patient exit survey that you might give out. but it introspects on the practice. And then there's certain composite scores that we've discovered as well, index like individual line item scores that tells us exactly what's going to happen. So one that might be really interesting to your audience here, and you can see this on updocmedia.com. It's like on the homepage. Is intention to stay. So we worded the question. It needs to be reworded, but we're keeping it for the sake of like statistical consistency, because we found that the verbiage currently says this. It says, please rate your intention to stay in the next 12 months, or describe your intention to stay for the next 12 months. And it's 0 to 10. 10 is extremely likely. 0 is not likely at all. We discovered that if you have an 8.5 and under, they are actively looking at jobs. Like they're looking somewhere else already at 8.5 and below. So you need to be at 8, like a 9 or a 10 for them to actually be loyal to you mentally. And then we discovered that depending on the hiring season, 4.5 or 3.5 and below, they have already applied to another job.
Wow.
So the CQI shows those kind of illuminations and creates like a matrix, a hotspot in something like a Google Sheet or Excel or whatever, a Minitab, whatever kind of statistical thing you want to use. But some of those are really big key indicators. They also show like if you have like a rogue clinician, because it asks you to rate your compatriots. It tells you if you have like a rogue supervisor, because it asks you to do some manage up scoring. So that stuff is it's pretty powerful from like a business intelligence standpoint. But it also leads right back into what you just said. Like I love that I'm double backing on your point because I'm enjoying it so much about left and right brained and ending on a win. Like it reminds me of a lot of the studies I did with like the Disney Institute content, and like how every job is a stage, right? And like that's something that I feel strongly about. I teach about that as well in CEUs, where often I'm flown out to like a practice chain, and they want to learn how to be better clinicians like on stage, or how to market better to like different like medical networks and that kind of stuff. And it's like it's very much like it's subtle. It's like how you stand or angle your shoulders and things like that. Like so, I'm really interested. I'd love for you. Like I'd love to double back on this, but I would love for you to like assign somebody to that one clinician who's 100% and start taking notes on body positioning, tone of voice. Like are they smizing, with their eyes, like different things like that, and as well as like how many questions they ask and how much active listening they're doing per interaction. I bet you it's something like 200% more than the average. Guaranteed.
I think it's 4 to 1. I think you're spot on with the questions. We've created a checklist that has 10 major categories of behaviors that we see in our highest performing clinicians. I'll be happy to share that with you.
Yeah, because that's where the secret is, right? And that's going back to your other question, I think a segment ago about how do we take care of our people before our processes? That's part of it, is training people of like, hey, how do you greet somebody from the waiting room? Or if you're telling them to go ahead and go on the gym and get warmed up on the bike, how do you approach the bike? Or how do you wave at them when they come in through the room? Like these things may seem like they're very soft skills, but they tug at certain emotional centers of our brain, like in the hippocampus, in the amygdala, these are deep rooted decision making processes. Like if you have like a brain science nerd on your team, like I've been really getting into the anterior midcingulate complex in terms of like will to live and like grit and all these different things. So there's a whole world out there for us to really dive into in private practice, in physical therapy at large.
Super smart. Ben, you mentioned the corporate quality index, how it's on UpDoc Media. What's the best way for our listeners to either connect with you or learn more about that?
Yeah. So excuse me. If you want to connect with me directly, I'm all over social. All my handles are the same. It's just at Dr. Ben Fung, DrBenFung. You can text me if you want to. I have a Google Voice number. It comes straight to me. It doesn't take calls. It's just 470 Ben Fung. So that's kind of fun.
Nice.
You can email me at ben@updocmedia.com. And I mean, all the reports are on updocmedia.com. If I remember correctly, you scroll down like halfway down the homepage. They're all linked right there. The corporate quality index specifically is going to be updocmedia.com/CQI. You can opt in right there. And then CQI-year will show you different like stats like year by year and so forth.
Shout out to Ben Wapker for putting this together for us. Want to make sure I recognize him. And then I lied. One more question.
Please.
Most influential book in
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh.
in your professional career.
Most influential book in my professional career undoubtedly is Why We Buy by Paco Underhill.
Yeah.
Why We Buy by Paco Underhill. I will warn you, unless they've changed the edition, that he does not narrate it. So I was very, very upset about that when I first went through that. But he's part of like the original crop of behavioral analysis and marketing. And he had like secret shoppers follow people around, say Target or Macy's or Nordstrom's, and like identify, just like you did, like the 10 consistent behaviors that high performers do. He identified different consistent human behaviors people did during shopping, and like they would like pick up something, like I fidget with a deck of cards, so like they would pick up like a product, and like even depending on how the way they held it would predict if they were going to buy it or not, right? And so he goes through all of that from retail shopping. He's updated it for online analysis. It really gave me a deeper understanding of the fact that there are evidence-based pieces to patient care that are not clinically driven. And we need to pay attention to that because it's more than getting like a better oswestry. It's more than getting, a better sit rising test time. Like it's so much more than that. It's about even like your tone of voice when you say goodbye, So that book, I could not rant enough about that book. So Why We Buy by Paco Underhill.
Nice. Ben, this has been great. Very much appreciate you doing this, man.
No, likewise. Thanks for making this happen. I know we had a circle, we circled the wagons or the calendar a couple of times. I'm just thrilled that we were able to have this conversation. It's been helpful to me. I can't wait for the stuff you're going to send me, and hopefully it's helpful to your audience, and opens the light that the struggle isn't alone. We all have very, very similar struggles, but our solutions are going to be unique to us, and I think that's where the hope is driven.
Yeah, love it. Thanks, man.
All right. Till next time.